This is the training for the 2013 state legislative session for safe passage, and I'm going to do a somewhat expedited version of this. I'm not going to cover all the slides, but we will post them out on the website, and I want to do that so that people will have a pretty efficient kind of walkthrough if they access it that way. And if there's time at the end, we can go through some of the slides that kind of get to the second and third levels here. So all right, now, let's see, there we go. All right. I'm just very briefly going to say who we are for those who don't know. We're a citizens group that's advocating for systemic improvements to the state's child welfare system in Minnesota. And systemic improvement means we're looking for changes in the way business is done. We don't serve individual children and families. And that child welfare is about child protection and foster care programs and related services. And our mission, again, is to redesign the Minnesota child welfare system so children are safe and reach their full potential. I'm going to skip how we work and some of our accomplishments and go right straight to the legislative goals for 2013 to 17. I'm going to go into each of these in somewhat more detail, but just to give you the big picture, our first goal is to start establishing integrity to the data in the system, and the reason for that is you can't do much with the system if you can't tell what's going on. And the first goal is to do this for screening reports of alleged maltreatment, and then for the voluntary child protection program in Minnesota, which is known as family assessment. And Ruth, Shirley, you just showed up, but I heard another thing. Did somebody else just join us?
Francis.
Hi, Francis. How are you? Did you have any trouble getting in?
No, not from the phone, no.
Okay, good. Well, I just
How
got...
are you?
I'm fine, and Ruth and Shirley are here as well, and so I'm just going through fairly straightforward here, and we just kind of got started on the new stuff, which is our legislative goals for 2013 to 2017. Now, we talked about 2017 because our main legislative packages, I hope, are going to be introduced this year and in the next biennium, which starts in 2015 to 2016, and then 2017 is kind of ongoing, continuing improvements. So as I was saying, Francis, we're talking about data integrity because you can't manage the program if you don't know what's going on. And the first issue is screening reports of alleged maltreatment, which, we will go into more detail, but which the legislative auditor found are not being done on a consistent basis. And then our next goal will be to get better data for family assessment, the voluntary program. Hi, Joe. I see that you're arriving. Maybe Joe can't hear me. And then to start, the second kind of level of this is to start measuring progress for every child, each child using validated screening and assessment tools. So I'll get into that. And then the third is to start implementing best practices in the state.
Oh, no.
All right. So this is the chart. I'll come back to this later on, but this is the chart that gives a visual of our strategy for the next several years. The 2013 legislative session here, which runs into 2014, and then 2015, which runs into 2016, and then this is for future years. So as you see, there's like three major colors in the first part, and then the fourth is red for the future. And the first color really is green, and that's about getting better data, and that flows all the way through these green arrows. And the next is to start managing with better data and being able to manage the program, so that's the blues. And then the yellows is about starting to improve performance, and then that leads to the red, which is continuous improvement. So in 2013, as part of our legislative package, we want to take the legislative auditor report and its recommendations and try to get that into law. I'm going to go into that in more detail. But we have a sponsor on the Senate side, Jeff Hayden, and actually I'm meeting with the revisor's office tomorrow to start working on the bill, and then he is helping us to find sponsors on the House side as well. So we're very hopeful that we're going to be able to put in a bill that will implement the legislative auditor recommendations from this past year, which I think you all know about. And then the next step, we would hope that we would get some support with Department of Human Services and others to start planning to do screenings and assessments of children so that we get a baseline in every child as to where they are when they come in the system, and then periodic updates to see if they're doing better as time goes on. So we'll talk about that some more as well. And then down here, the third step, we hope at least in 2014, if not sooner, to start doing the same with family assessment data as we're doing with the basic reports of child maltreatment, and to get better data there. And then going into and also start to look at evidence-based interventions. In other words, programs and services that are backed up by research. So that's the basic green stuff here, which is getting better data. And then the idea here is you get more, if I can just follow the basic maltreatment reporting information. Oh, sorry about that. The basic maltreatment reporting information will get more reliable data, and that will lead to children who should get screened in and get an assessment, and Child Protection Services will get screened in and won't be screened out inappropriately. So that's the basic drift of how this works. So before, let me go, now that you have that in your mind, into some of the more detailed steps for each of these, so you can see where we're coming from, and then we'll talk about exactly what we are trying to accomplish in 2013. So our agenda here for 2013, I'm going to try to do this highlighter and see if I can use it. Great. To enact the Office of Legislative Auditor is what OLA means, recommendations. That's from the report, which was completed in March. Restore the budget cuts for 2012. This is a new item. When I met with Senator Hayden, he wanted to have a companion bill to try to start putting some of the money back that's been cut over the years. And I've been looking at some of those numbers and trying to analyze them for Senator Hayden. And essentially, the the fund that includes child welfare money started out in the $97 million range in 2002, and now it's down to about $39 million. And so we're we're trying to confirm those numbers, but there have been some pretty significant cuts, and he wants to start putting some of that back. I don't know how far he'll get with that, but it's good to just see somebody kind of taking a stand about those cuts, and we're trying to help him get good numbers on that. Then we want to, mid-year, we hope to request the Department of Human Services start to look at screening and assessment tools. This is part of kind of a federal push now to really get a baseline on each kid and see how they're doing in several parts of their lives. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then maybe we'll look at some additional possibilities if we really get some momentum going. So let me keep going for a while. You may have questions, but I think I'm going to cover them shortly, and then I'll take a break once I get through the first section of this and ask for questions. But I just want to say that this is the state legislature, and this vehicle can make unexpected twists and turns and moves you've never seen before. So you can never tell how far you'll get. Last year, for example, the legislative audit report came out too late for us to really do any legislation with it, and it was looking like we were not going to get very far, and all of a sudden Senator Han, who's very conservative and we didn't expect to get any help from, did a hearing for us, and the legislative auditor came and more or less said, well, things are not so bad. But we were able to get a lot of people there who were from places like the Crisis Nursery and the Children's Review Panel in Minnesota, and they, really turned it around and said that things really need to be improved in the state. So I have lost my the side here to see where everybody is, and so there you are. I need to get it back so I can see who's joined. So, all right, so I've got all three of you there. Joe, can you hear us? Oh, you're self-muted. I see. Okay.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So onward here. So basically, you know that this report was initiated by Safe Passage, and broadly speaking, the findings were that maltreatment standards vary widely across the state, and I'll give you some examples of that. And the counties are not keeping reliable data on referral, and the role of the Department of Human Services is pretty weak. And so that's not any surprise to anybody who's been working with the department. So what do they mean by screening variations, or it varies across the state? Well, they found that screen-in rates ranged from 0 to 89% across the state. And within states, they varied. One state, it was 46% in one year, and then it was 90% in the next year. They're just all over the place. And the standards, more importantly, the standards vary between the counties. One example that the legislative auditor gave is risk of harm versus actual harm. In some counties, they will only screen in a case if there's already been actual harm to children, which is not consistent with the law or with the Department of Human Services guidelines or with national practice. So they gave an example of, the legislative auditor gave an example of a father who was terrorizing his family with a gun and then shot the child's pet in front of the child. And some counties did not screen that in because there was no actual harm. But in reality, across the country, there is a, one of the criteria for screening cases is terrorizing children and a credible risk of harm. And so those counties are out of line with the law, with the DHS guidelines, and with national practices. Another example was what is necessary food. Some counties said if there was evidence of malnutrition, they would go out and do an assessment. Other counties said, one county said that they would only go out and do an assessment if the child was in the bottom 5 percentile, or 5th percentile, the bottom 20% of height and weight and development for their age. Well, the actual standard is if there's malnutrition or if a parent is deliberately starving their child. So you don't have to wait until the child is actually suffering from malnutrition or is developmentally delayed from a physical point of view before you go out and do an assessment. So these are things that the legislative auditor said need to be clarified and put into and made common practice across the state. And other areas that they mentioned also were there were different practices in terms of at what level is exposure to drugs enough to screen in a case. Domestic violence, there are fairly clear guidelines on when domestic violence, comes in is enough to screen a child in, but there's a wide variety of practice about that. Presence of a sex offender, sometimes they would screen in automatically, sometimes not. Adverse impact on mental health was all over the place, and educational neglect, the same thing. So the basic message from the legislative audit report was that there needs to be standardization of what counts, quote unquote, as child abuse and neglect in Minnesota. And I should back up on that and say, I don't think I have it on the slides, but their recommendation was that the Department of Human Services promulgate administrative rules rather than guidelines, because rules have the force of law and guidelines are simply advice. And so part of the legislation that we'll try to propose, and hopefully we'll get in the bill, is to ask the Department of Human Services to promulgate rules that put the criteria for abuse and neglect into an administrative rule with the force of law rather than just a document that gives guidance to the counties. So then the other major finding in the legislative auditor was variations in the data. Some counties don't keep enough data to identify patterns of abuse and neglect. So and the law says essentially if there's a pattern over time, such as neglect or hunger, starvation of a child, or repeated injuries to a child, and maybe one of them isn't sufficient to screen it in, but when you see that this keeps happening, then there's cause for concern. Well, some counties don't keep enough data to identify those patterns, and other counties, I know Hennepin in particular, does keep that data, but their policy is, according to the Citizens Review Panel, that you're not to take that into account. You should take each call on its own merits. Secondly, the legislative auditor found that they're using, in some counties, untrained staff to decide if a call is child protection. So essentially, you've got different people in intake here, and some of them haven't been trained by the state in the child protection kind of criteria. And then sometimes there are counties that sometimes, if they're not busy, they enter in the screened out reports into the social service information system, and sometimes they don't. So you got a hodgepodge of what's considered to be a report in the first place, because sometimes these untrained staff take a report and say, no, that's not child protection, and so they don't even enter it, or sometimes they don't have time to enter it, or sometimes they don't keep the data. So you can't really see how many times a child's been reported or what happened to them as a result. And also, as we know from prior years, the Department of Human Services doesn't report screened out calls to the legislature. They call them referrals. And when the legislature gets a report, what they see is there were 17,800 reports of child abuse. Well, that's actually about a third of the actual number of calls that came in alleging abuse. So it gives, a sense that there's not as much going on in terms of child maltreatment reports as there are. So what the legislative order says is that the legislature should require counties to save identifying information on screened out reports. But the Department of Human Services just issued a bulletin on November 5th, which says that all that the counties have to do is report, number one, that there was a report, and number two, the number of children, no identifying information. So we kind of actually lost ground on that since the legislative auditor report. So what does that mean in human terms? Well, let's take this example of this Howard boy. I don't know how many of you have been watching this on the, in the news, but early in November, there was a report of a boy in North Mankato in Nicola County, 8 years old. He's adopted, weighed 35 pounds, 3.5 feet tall, about half the size of someone that should be his age. Bones were protruding, brain atrophy. His heartbeat had slowed, which I think is a sign that your systems are starting to slow down. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not positive. He was beaten, locked in a room. He's been starved for the past year. He would be, the way they watched him was his siblings would be told to hose him down a couple times a week. And his parents slept outside his room and locked his door so he wouldn't, quote, steal, unquote, food. And so these people are state licensed foster parents, and their license was renewed in March of this year. And when it finally got to court, the mother finally took the boy in because he was throwing up blood, and that's when the thing got picked up. And the judge quickly returned the 3 other siblings home, despite evidence they were malnourished. So, it's sort of like, where do you start with this one? And then another was just last month as well, and I think we see these from time to time in the paper of shaken baby syndrome. Shawnee Bradshaw in Hennepin County was rendered quadriplegic by the mother's boyfriend, and when they talked to others in the household, they said, oh yes, this child was beaten a lot and had blood clots in her eyes on a regular basis. There's another infant in the household, and we don't know what's going on with that child. So these are real-life examples of what's going on right now in the state. And we are saying that we need better data to determine who's accountable. For example, the Howard boy should have been identified earlier. He went to a dentist who saw enamel coming off his teeth, and as a mandated reporter, the dentist should have reported neglect. It's possible he did, but we don't know. The police picked up a child while he was searching for food. He was walking 3 miles to some quick stop to see if he could buy a hamburger. I guess he got some money. The police should have picked there. They're required to report that sort of thing by law. And DHS license renewal in March should have found the problem. And then we don't know, but Shawnee may have been known to authorities because families and friends often report such situations. But right now, we don't have a way to know if this occurred. So, so that leads back to our 2013 agenda to enact the legislative order recommendation. First of all, our proposed legislation, which, as I mentioned, I don't know, Joe, if you were on the line, but I'm meeting with the revisor's office tomorrow, which are the people who write these bills, to clarify risk of harm and neglect, and require counties to keep enough data on prior reports to identify patterns of abuse and neglect. So again, the new DHS bulletin, which is in response to the legislative audit report, eliminates this requirement. To enter all referrals into the social service information, this is the only thing I can think of that might actually cause an increase in workload. And then require the Department of Human Services to include referrals in its report. In other words, both the screened out and the screened in ones. And to issue rules, as I said, rather than guidelines, so it has the force of law. What will that do? Well, reporting basic data is going to show, first of all, how many times children were screened out. We have data that Harvard County gave us that shows the number of children that were reported. The times children reported is up to 25 times per child. And the Citizens Review Panel in Hennepin looked at 10 cases, and they found up to 15 times per child. And a lot of children, most of the children were reported at least 5 times. We don't know how many times they're reported, how many times they're screened in, how many times they're referred to family assessment, what percentage referred to family assessment actually got services, how long they're known in the system, number of times the children re-abused after they're first known to the county and courts, and whether mandated reporters did what they're supposed to do and referred a case at the proper time. So when we start getting basic data, we'll begin to see this. The family assessment stuff we're not going to tackle till next year, but that's the goal, is to start being able to see this type of information on a regular basis. And the benefits of improved performance reporting, as you can see, if they're being repeatedly screened out without any action, or persistent failure to engage families in family assessment will become visible. And the CHIPS research we're doing in Hennepin County, along with the Citizens Review Panel, is showing that roughly 70–75% of families that are screened into family assessment don't even get offered services, and fewer than that actually engage in services. And then, of course, there's very little in terms of evaluation about whether those services are effective. So we'll be able to start seeing how many times, in effect, after you finally get screened in, you get sent to family assessment, nothing happens, and you're right back out the back door. So then you can start to look at the relative performance of different counties. I think even having a situation where, County X has screened out some children 20 times, and they've screened out a lot of children 10 times, whereas County Y has only screened in a few children, has only gotten, say, a maximum of 10 reports before they screened in a child. You're going to start to be able to map those differences and ask County X why they're so far out of line with the rest of the state. And you'll be able to spot best practices and trends, negative trends or positive, more easily. And then if we get that far, and then I think I'm going to take a break and see what kind of questions you might have. But as I mentioned, and some other changes, this companion bill by Senator Hayden to restore some cuts to the block grant. That has been known in the past as CCSA. It's now called the Vulnerable Children's and Adults Act. It still has the same amount of money in it, but all of the things that aren't vulnerable children and adults were cut out of that grant. So a lot of mental health services, a lot of CD services, some child care. And then if we get far enough, then some things I'd like to tackle are to require doctors to report prenatal drug abuse, because there's, I've seen, even in the cases I've reviewed, maybe 40 cases, a lot of fetal alcohol syndrome that could have been addressed if someone had been effectively working with the mom. But what's happened in Hennepin County is the physicians lobbied to get exempted from reporting prenatal drug abuse if they were offering prenatal care to the mother. And Ramsey County objected to that, but they lost. Ramsey County has a program where they work with mothers who are abusing drugs while they're getting prenatal care, and they report it, and they seem to be able to walk that line effectively without losing, the relationship with the mom. Here's one that's just come to light. I would like to see some reporting of selected information immediately on child deaths and serious illnesses, and as I was reading the statutes to see where we needed to make the changes that the legislative auditor recommended, I found a provision there that I had never heard of before, which says that a member of the public may ask a county to give a report in an instance of child death or serious injuries that will say how many times the child was reported previously, what the county response was. So in like the Howard case or the Shawnee Bradshaw case, in theory we could let, one of you or I or Safe Passage or the Citizens Review Panel or whomever could ask for a report. And the reason that's important is I think that it's the last time that the Department of Human Services did their report on child deaths and serious injuries, it was 5 years between reports. And so I think we need to have some more transparency and immediate accountability for what's going on there. So we're chewing over whether and how Safe Passage ought to jump into that and start a process of requesting these reports as there are stories in the paper about children being killed or seriously injured. So stay tuned on that. And then report on failed adoptions. I would like to see that. When you look at the Howard case and other stories I hear, there's no statistics on the number of failed adoptions. And then mental health screening. It's in the law that anytime there's a child abuse case and there's a behavioral health need, that there's supposed to be a screening. That's the mental health division of the Department of Human Services. But it is honored in the breach more than the observance. The last time there were just barely over 50% of the time the counties were complying with that requirement. That would give us some kind of a baseline on a lot of kids that we don't have now. So those are nice to haves if we can get to them. And then the legislative order recommended some administrative changes, some changes about training county staff into these new consistent screening standards and the social service information system. I should have typed that out in full. And then to get started, as I said, about the screening and assessment and to work with stakeholders and to come up with some screening and assessment tools that will work. And again, I'll get into that a little more in detail, building on the instruments I just mentioned that mental health provided. And there are some potential planning funds that we may try to work with Department of Human Services to get for this purpose. And so next steps in terms of volunteers, basically what we're hoping is that we will have a good solid group of volunteers this year who are going to follow the updates. We'll give you updates as bills are introduced and they're updated. Try to get to your representatives early. I think we're going to be able to hire a part-time person to help do some of that scheduling, and that'll help a lot. So we want to get to people as soon as we have any bills in the hopper, and we'd like people to be available. We hope to get hearings on this. If the bill gets introduced on both sides, we should have hearings, and so we'd like to ask at least some people, whoever can do it, to be available to try to attend hearings on short notice, and emails and phone calls as the bills move forward. So I'm going to just take a break there and I've been talking for a while and just look at the whole picture here and see where we are, but see what kind of questions you might have. Can you all hear me? You got awfully quiet there.
Yeah, I hear you, Rich.
Okay.
I can hear you also, Rich. Joe.
All right. So what do you, all right.
I guess
So,
in.
what's that?
I said, I think we're just all trying to practice.
Francis, I still didn't hear what you said. You said what?
I said, I think we're just all trying to.
Oh, concentrate, yeah. So,
Yeah, concentrate and practice what you're saying.
okay. Well, and I'm going to put this down on the website, and we'll go over it again, when we get down to the session. By then, things may have changed a little bit. And they probably will. They almost always do. So that's where we are so far. One of the things I want to do is, talk about what the changes are in terms of this whole idea of screening and assessment for kids and how it's getting supported nationally and what the purpose of it is. So if you all are ready to keep going through this, I'll get back to it.
Yes, I'm ready to go ahead.
All right. So in the absence of anybody throwing their body in front of the tank, I'm going to keep going here. And so I think the way to introduce that is to talk about the where are we going beyond 2014? As I mentioned, we want to improve family assessment reporting, and that because both the Citizens Review Panel and our work have shown that somewhere in almost 85–90% of families that are put in that kind of diverted to that track are not getting any services at all. And I don't think that's the intention of the program, and that we can't really deal with that until we get good data. Then I think that sets the framework for the legislature reinvesting in child welfare. They've cut and cut and cut, and at some point, we have to start probably putting some money back. And, we have another $1.2 billion deficit this year, so it's going to be tough, but it's always going to be tough. And one of the things, as I've said to some of you, that I've heard even from the more liberal or supportive members of the legislature is, gee, how do we know if we put any money into this we're going to get any results, because they're not confident that the system can deliver. So if there's a tightening up of the data and a more kind of accountable system where they can get reports and see what's going on, I think that sets the foundation for saying, okay, people are making an effort, you can see what's going on, so we're going to ask you for some more money. And I'm just checking, someone is unmuted, and so it's getting a little noisy there. So if you can remute, that would be great. Then we're getting into the future, requiring counties to use what's called evidence-based practices and services. So this would be basically services that have a solid research base and are being used widely in other areas. And that's, for example, Hennepin County is using something called multi-systemic therapy. And if you implement it faithfully to the model, then you should get measurable results, and it's been replicated in a number of places. So what's happening is the federal government is starting to say, look, you're spending money, you're spending our money, your money, you should spend on things that work and not on things that don't work. And so here's a list of programs and services that are effective if you implement them right, and we want you to start using those. So we'll talk more about that as we go, but that's the concept. And to start measuring outcomes, not processes. If you look at all of the data that's collected in child welfare, it's all about steps in the process, and very little of it is about results for kids. And then once you do that, you can start holding the counties accountable for improving. So evidence-based practices. There's really two components. One is the screening and assessment part, and the other is the services themselves. And as I mentioned, there's new leadership at the Federal Children's Bureau. The Children's Bureau is the top child welfare agency in the federal bureaucracy, so it's a top agency in the country. There's a guy named Brian Samuels, who's the new commissioner there, and he is saying that we should do screening and assessment for every child every time they enter or re-enter the system. So you get a baseline when the kid comes into the system, and if they stay in the system every 3 months or 6 months, whatever, depending mostly on their age, to see if they're doing better or worse. And the federal suggestion is you look at 4 areas and you track children's progress. Physical health and development, that would have been interesting with the Howard boy, because that would have stuck out like a sore thumb. Cognitive skills, because if children are doing well, they'll develop normally in terms of cognitive skills, or they'll lose ground if they're not. Behavioral, in other words, interpersonal skills, or your behavior in the community and school, and mental health, particularly an initial trauma screening. And the simple concept there is, as a result of the child welfare system, are children doing better or worse? And you should be able to track that. And here's a simple example. I need a better chart, but this will have to do for now. This is a height and weight chart for children from birth to 36 months. And this is the weight, and this is the length or the height of the child. And this darkest line in the middle is the median, 50 percentile. So if you took the Howard boy in terms of weight, he would have been way down here, underneath the 5th percentile. And as a result of the child welfare system, he should start, when you measure him, there should be a dot here, and a dot here, and a dot here, and a dot here, and he should get better and better, or closer to this norm, which is, it's been normed for the entire population of the U.S. he should be getting close to that norm in these things as time goes on. If he's getting further away, then you say, what's going on? And you start asking questions, right? So that's the concept. And if you do that with physical development, cognitive skills, mental health, and behavior, then you can see over time if the children are doing better or worse. You can see it on the individual child. So when there's a team meeting with the caseworkers, they should go over these children and see how they're doing. They should report on this every time they go into court on a CHIPS case, and then there should be, of course, a data that's not de-identified where you roll it up for counties and the state as a whole. How many children are doing 5%, 10%, 15% better than they were 3 months ago? How many are doing 5, 10, 15% worse? That kind of a report. So that's basically where the screening and assessment comes in. And what the federal government has done is provided a list of a number of screening and assessment tools in each of these 4 areas, you know, the physical and the mental health and cognitive and behavioral, that have been validated and normed, which means they've been used thousands and thousands of times, and they're reliable, is basically what it means when they're normed. In particular, they've been looking for ones that are relatively inexpensive and easy to administer, so you don't have to hire a psychologist to do them, and yet still be reliable. So that's the concept on the on this approach to screening and assessment. And the federal people make the point that historically there have been point-in-time screening, and this is what the Division of Mental Health is saying at DHS, is to do it at a certain point in time. But what the distinction the federal people are making is they want to do a functional assessment, which means all of those major areas of a child's life, and do it, update it frequently so that you can see what kind of progress is being made. So basically, functional assessment means look at the whole child and look at them, continually over time. So that's that. And then evidence-based intervention, sometimes they call it evidence-informed interventions or something when there's not enough research yet. But they're saying that federal funding is going to be increasingly tied to services that are evidence-based, meaning research-based, and have measurable outcomes. And so that means requiring services that have a robust research-based evidence of results, and they give, again, a bunch of different examples for different types of situations depending on the child's age or what the issue is. So there's parent-child interactive therapy is one that comes up a lot, which is what it sounds like. Parent and children work together with a therapist and how they interact with another. Triple P is called, which is family therapy with parenting skills training, multi-systemic therapy. Those are just a few of the ones that they recommend. Secondly, to require providers of services such as parenting skills training or chemical dependency treatment to show results using pre- and post-tests. So what we have seen, we talked somewhat with Miami-Dade County, which has been historically kind of one of the worst. Florida has been one of the worst states. But they now say for parenting skills training, they'll require their contractors to do a pre- and post-test. And when they come into court, if the parent hasn't made enough progress in terms of their understanding and use of parenting skills, then the case doesn't get closed, or maybe they don't get their children back yet until they do well enough. And then if they have contractors that do not, as a whole, help parents improve and help families reunite, then they don't use that contractor anymore. They use ones that are getting results. So it's affecting who gets money and the effectiveness of the services. So we're looking to to advocate for that approach with the services that counties are buying. And so the role of volunteers is to, as we go out over the years, is to monitor that as we start getting these reports, look at the reports, and make sure that counties are actually using them for case management, that looking at the results of the updates, the screening and assessment, whether evidence-based services are being used, whether there's data on the effectiveness of contracted services, and as I said, report the child's progress at every court appearance, and that's what they do in Miami-Dade County. And then the Department of Human Services take these practices and make sure, and then it's periodic audits of the counties, make sure that they're actually using them in their case management and their case their team meetings and so forth. So that is basically the main presentation. The rest of the material that I have here goes into some of the program facts and details that we have been through in recent kind of training on the child welfare, the state of the state, so to speak, in child welfare. So that's the main thing right there. So I'm interested in your feedback and in your comments.
Rich?
Yes.
This is Joe.
I know.
3 things. If we're going to be requesting putting things in rule, I think you need to also recognize people are going to say you need dollars to make that effective.
All right, let's talk about that, because why would that be dollars?
Well, what I'm saying, the rule has to be funded, otherwise the rule is just going to be a club, and people will be held accountable and will say we don't have the funds to implement the rule. So what I'm just saying is, part of the discussion needs to be how is that funding already available within current funding, and that it's not necessary to add additional funds, and that it would not be a legitimate argument to say that we can't perform against the rule because we don't have enough funds.
Well, it's a good point, and it's obviously going to be a big continuing issue. Here's my somewhat less than fully adequate response. The basic issue is if the counties do what they're supposed to do, then it probably will require more resources. But I think that in theory, if you say, well, we've had guidelines all along the counties are supposed to be following, so if you just turn those into rules, it's only an accountability mechanism, because they should have been doing this all along, and so it shouldn't be any increase. Well, probably the reason that they haven't been following the guidelines is because they didn't have enough resources to do it, right? So it's a little bit of a rhetorical argument to say that they should already have been doing it. But what I hope that will do then is to get pushback from the county saying, hey, we haven't been doing everything that we should do, we know that, but the reason is that we don't have enough resources, and part of the reason is because the state of Minnesota only funds about 10% of the costs, and we're, if not the lowest, the second or third lowest in the country. So if you really want to implement these rules, then you need to have a little more skin in the game to have credibility with us. So that's, I think, realistically, Joe, I think you're on target, and I think that's probably what I would expect.
Another point I'd like to bring up is that I really support the pre- and post-testing by providers, but I think that needs a consistent tool that is simple, that is specific to the role and provider type across all that are in a similar role type function. And without
people like parenting skills, they have something that's right
and simple. It was like there should be, I'll just say 10. It doesn't matter, 6, 10, whatever you want to pick. Categorical, either questions or measures that are. It's relatively simple, but they are. They're key triggers. Let's put it that way. That things that need to be tracked or evaluated, and not a laborious or burdensome type tool.
All right, so when you go back to the chart where we were talking about, I'm just going to do this a minute, where we were talking about starting to gather data on evidence-based practices here, then let's get this. Plan child screenings and assessments, and then analyze evidence-based interventions, those 2 steps. The idea there would be to get buy-in from the Department of Human Services and hopefully, at least a few counties, to go out and look at what the rest of the world is doing in this respect and come up with exactly what you're talking about, some instruments that are practical to implement. They're not, you don't have to pay somebody $200 per, instance to evaluate parenting skills or chemical dependency training. And then it becomes a reasonable request to the counties to do that. So what I'm hoping we can do, and I mean it's just a gleam in our eye at this point, but I've been in touch with the people at the Federal Children's Bureau and with in particular the policy analyst who's responsible for these new initiatives that I talked about. And last year they had some federal pilot grants that were substantial. They were over $600,000 a year for 5 years to exactly do this kind of stuff, to plan this stuff and then to implement it and then to evaluate the results. So we're in the early stages of trying to put together some kind of a coalition of stakeholders, people like us and Children's Defense Fund and Minnesota Council of Child Caring Agencies, Lutheran Social Services, and if I can persuade them that this is worth doing, then we would, of course, approach the Department of Human Services and maybe a couple big counties. So that would be the idea, is that we try to, if that doesn't work, then between foundations and legislators, I mean, I think basically if we got enough people that said we wanted to do this, that would be where there's a will, where there's a will, there's a way, and we'd find some money or some graduate students or, combination of things. But in Miami-Dade County, they have come up with some of these, and I understand there are others in other parts of the country. So they have exactly on anger management and parenting skills training. They have an instrument they use for each of those, which is relatively inexpensive and easy to use, and that's the basis for increasingly for the judges deciding whether it's time to reunify the family or whether more work needs to be done, and it's also the basis increasingly for deciding who gets money in next year's contracts. So I agree with you there. I think there's a lot of homework to be done to get to what you're talking about, but I think it's possible. Good comments.
One other thing, and since everybody is still here, when I listen to your speech, it cycles. It goes up and down. I don't know if it's because you're moving away from your mic or what it might be, but I don't know whether I'm the only one experiencing that or is everybody else experiencing that. So it's a public question.
Good. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, I was experiencing that too. This is Ruth.
Hi, Ruth. Well, I think it's me then, and or me or my computer. So what I'm going to do is invest in, they say you should have a headset that you can plug directly in the computer. So I'm going to invest in that. I think that's supposed to fix it. But I'm glad to know that.
That was true in our last practice session also.
Okay. Well, it's probably me getting excited and, moving back and forth and jumping up and down and stuff. It's probably what it is. So let's see. What else Francis, Shirley, Ruth, anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. No, me either, Ruth, but not right now.
Is it basically making sense?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it is. It's very thorough and very helpful.
Good. Well, I think it's a little more concrete than we've had in past years, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's the worries that we won't get the bill introduced or it'll, won't get hearings because, there's like the exchange, the healthcare exchange this year is going to be a big issue. It's in the same committees. But, what happened, I would say what happened last year is we hardly accomplished any of our legislative goals and we made a lot of progress. We found some champions that are still with us. We had that big hearing that kind of turned the corner. So I just think it's a question of however each individual strategy year goes, that we're making continuous progress. And so the timing may not be exactly what's on the project plan, but I think the momentum is moving in the right direction. So I'm encouraged.
Great.
Well,
Sounds good.
since I avoided all of the extra slides, we did this in 1 hour, which I think is encouraging too. Maybe the most encouraging thing of all. So, great. Well, any other comments or questions before we sign off?
Not for me.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping we got enough money in the Get to the Max day, and we got a big contribution from an individual this summer that we're going to try to hire somebody, it could be John O'Neill, whom many of you know, to work 10 hours a week during the session just to do all that stuff that is difficult for me to keep up with, which is not only scheduling, but when the biggest issue is when we had something scheduled and then it had to be rescheduled because there was something happened in the legislature. So I think that should significantly improve our ability to provide that support to you.
One other thought I have is I think your visuals are really good. You can see tremendous progress in where you've come with all that. A subset of all this made as an available module for staff when we go and meet with somebody, rather than giving hard copy to everyone, to be able to have them have a link to this, and we can provide that as a resource for staff to use, and they could either call you or call some other individuals to follow up if they need some kind of questions answered.
When you say staff,
well, whoever we might designate as a party who could provide them follow-up by phone, by email, whatever, to their experience of going, let's just the graphic you have up there right now.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to put a narrative with it, that would be fine. I mean, you can even provide a voiceover with the technology that's there.
Yeah, but I'm not. Are you talking about like you're talking about like staff at a Department of Social Services? Or?
No, I mean no, within our own with safe passages.
Okay.
And what I meant was, instead of us doing the leave behind of the hard copy, which is not bad, we could have a more sophisticated one, which would be a subset of what you've got here with some level of narrative that's with it, so the person accessing it gets their own private presentation.
Okay.
But then there's also the option for a follow-up with, it could be one of us, I'll just use it, or it could be a staff person, could be you.
So somebody who might want to volunteer, or somebody who's a new volunteer, or maybe we visit with an agency and the staff there want to have, is that what you're thinking? I'm not quite sure.
How we resource that, I'm not worried about. The key thing I thought was to have the visuals available online in an organized fashion that is a subset of all that you're showing.
All right, so this, a briefer and more focused version of this online. So I record that, and it's more, okay, I get it. All right.
You go to meet with your representative, you meet with the staff of the representative, and go over things, but you provide this as a backup that they could then sit down with the representative and go through themselves too. So.
All right, I'm sorry to be dense, but I think I finally get what you mean. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what I need, I need to kind of come up with a more concise version of this that's for someone who's not necessarily getting trained for the session. And okay, I'll work on that. And then Joe, you'd also had the idea of, and I didn't put it in this because it's so busy, but there's a great chart that shows the progression of a child through the system, and it illustrates, for example, that almost 90% or 85% of kids go through the family assessment and they come up empty. I want to take that, and your suggestion was to make that kind of a separate, presentation that would just be standalone and not put it in the this presentation because it's a half-an-hour discussion by itself. So I plan to do that, and then I'll take your, your thought here and try to do something with it. That would be a standalone for people like legislative staff or whomever that can go and get a quicker, version of this.
Modules that they can use to understand what we're doing and use that themselves in their own briefings.
Okay, in their own brief. Oh, You know what I mean? So like Ruth goes to see her representative and takes her laptop with her and goes through it that way. Is that part of what you mean? One way to do it?
That could be, or you bring, for instance, just a visual. It's up there again. You bring that with you, but you can say if you go online to this link,
okay.
You'll see, I'll just say 10 slides with some additional information, so that when you leave that place, it isn't just leaving behind a hard copy picture. You're leaving behind access to something a bit more sophisticated, but not as much as you are putting here. It's just too much.
Okay, got it.
You know,
Yeah.
It's an offline discussion for the details. I'm just bringing it up as a topic.
No, I mean, I get what you mean now. Yes, something more user-friendly, particularly for people who aren't, you know, in the fold and doing this with us. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think 10 slides is it's a good number to aim for.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, those are great. That's great feedback, and I appreciate it. And so I'm going to try to edit this down, you know, to post on the web, just without the discussion afterwards, but for people who get later, and we're good to go.
I thought I heard someone saying something out there.
I just was saying that I thought your idea was a great idea.
Joe's idea. Yeah.
Pardon?
Joe's idea.
Yes.
Yes. Great. All right. Well, thank you all. You know, if you think of anything else, just send me an email. Oh, let me just take a quick pause. Have people been getting and reading the blog that we've been sending out from the 2020 hindsight?
I've been getting it, saving it, and reading some of them.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm getting a surprise.
I've been getting it.
You have too? Okay. Was that Shirley or was that Francis?
Francis.
All right. Well, I don't, you know, I'm thinking it kind of goes out into space and nothing happens, and then every couple of days I'll get a comment from somebody I haven't heard from in a while that they're reading it. So, you know, that's, they say that goes out to 40,000 people every day. There's 40,000 subscribers. So that's been getting some, I think, good traction. And I don't know if you got the idea, but we got a volunteer who was just graduated from Boston College, who was in charge of their literary magazine and a few other things. And like most 20-somethings, he doesn't have a job. So he's been ghostwriting those for us. And it's just kind of fun, you know, because we've got volunteers from all over. I've got the person who's writing our grants is living in Bath, England right now. So people find us on these websites, and we're getting great volunteer support. So anyway, I just wanted to see if you were getting those. So great. Well, I better let you go. I keep promising to let you go, and then I don't. But I appreciate all the feedback.
Okay, good job, Rich. Good job.
Okay.
Thank you, Rich.
Very, very good. Thank you, Rich.
Okay.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yes, you too.
You too.
Okay.
Bye.